Hi. It's been 12 years since Novation released a controller in this form factor. Launch Control Mark III is a significant update that shares many of the features introduced in its bigger brother, the Launch Control XL Mark III, in a much more compact form factor. It now comes with a screen that, while small, lets you preview parameter names and see their values so that you're not in the dark about what you're controlling. New RGB LEDs also help identify what you're controlling and give a hint at its value. Launch Control Mark III also comes with auto mapping integration with multiple DAWs, and you can program your own custom modes to control software and hardware gear, with new physical MIDI ports making it easier to hook up to external gear and control hidden parameters that may not have on-panel controls. In this video, I'll look at it in depth, compared to the Launch Control XL Mark III and the original Launch Control, and also show you a web app I made to enhance it and any other MIDI controller with automation, snapshots, randomization, and morphing. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Novation sent me these controllers. Other than that, no money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's dive in. The biggest news, I think, compared to the previous generation and any other knob-based competitor at this price range is the small but useful screen. As far as I could tell, it's identical to the one on the Launch Control XL Mark III. One of the frustrations that I have with many MIDI controllers is that when you reach out to edit something, there's no way to know what you're going to be controlling, what its value is, and whether you're even in the right mode. Now, a per encoder screen would be better, but obviously cost more. One screen is a major improvement over none, and if you're not sure what a knob does, you can always hold Shift to check its value without changing it, and you can double tap Shift to latch it to check out multiple encoders at a time. The encoders, by the way, aren't touch sensitive, so you do need to hold Shift, say, and turn them a bit to preview their value. Depending on the DAW integration, you'll see also non-numerical values, so for example, panning left or right. You'll see the proper ranges, not just MIDI CCs. Same goes for editing device parameters. You'll see proper names, values, and ranges. So what I'm saying is the screen is useful. The second big difference compared to the original Launch Control and some competitors is that the encoders are now endless encoders, like on the new Launch Control XL Mark III, as opposed to pots on the original. Pots are better if you're controlling only one set of parameters, but if you're using these to control multiple sets of parameters, then pot knobs are always in the wrong place once you swap modes, change devices, or tracks. The whole point of smart controllers like these is to do just that, to be smart, control a DAW, or more than one set of controls via MIDI. A disadvantage of encoders compared to pot knobs is that you can't see where they're pointing or the parameter's value in a range unless you look on screen. Novation somewhat alleviates this when you're controlling the mixer, giving you a different color for left pan, right pan, or the center detent, though not when controlling other DAW parameters for some reason. The LED brightness doesn't change, but if you're in one of the custom modes, meaning the modes you program yourself to control software or hardware synths, then the LED intensity does indicate where the parameter is in its range. Hopefully you see this on camera. Next, the LEDs, like on the new XL Mark III, are RGB LEDs, both under the encoders and for the buttons. In the custom modes, you can change their color, and in the DAW modes, their color will change based on what you're up to, including track selection, where they'll work based on the colors of the tracks in your DAW. In the custom modes, you can give all of these any color you like. When comparing to the XL Mark III, the big obvious differences are that the XL has 3 rows of encoders as opposed to just 2, a row of faders, and an additional row of buttons. The XL also lets you store 15 user or custom modes as opposed to only 7 on the Launch Control Mark III. The Launch Control XL Mark III also has 2 transport buttons, and in DAW control mode, the bottom row of encoders can control various transport functions like playback position, zooming in, and loops, whereas those functions aren't auto-mapped on the Launch Control Mark III. Depending on your DAW, you could still use the custom modes to map some or all of these to control transport or other functions, for example, play, pause, undo, and so on. In terms of build, the Launch Control Mark III, like the XL Mark III, is all plastic but feels very solid. It's got 16 encoders and 8 buttons that work both in DAW and custom modes. The page and track buttons don't do anything in the custom modes, but they work in the DAW modes. You swap modes by pressing the mode button and then choosing the mode that it is you want to use, or if this isn't enabled, just long press it and choose the mode that you want to use. The encoders overall have a very good feel. You can both fine-tune parameters or sweep their range with fast motions. You can't customize this speed in the DAW modes, but if we head out to one of the user modes and then long press these two buttons, this gives you access to the global settings, one of which is the encoder curve. Each of the user modes also has a few settings you can edit, including how MIDI flows through the device in each mode. Speaking of connectivity, we've also got a major improvement compared to the original launch control. Like in the new XL MK3, we now have physical DIN MIDI ports, a single MIDI input, and 2 MIDI outputs, as opposed to none on the original launch control, making it much easier to interface and work with hardware instruments without going through a computer or USB host. You can use these ports to control external gear using the onboard custom modes, and at the same time as a MIDI interface for a computer or tablet or phone, you get a single input but 2 separately addressable outputs. They both use USB-C for power, sending MIDI back and forth, and for programming their custom modes, which you do using the component's software. You can't edit the modes on the device itself. Besides using the MIDI input as a physical input for your computer or mobile device, you can also merge incoming MIDI to outgoing MIDI through the output ports, so that you could use both this and a keyboard-based controller to control a synth or desktop module. You can filter incoming MIDI, and you can also set the controller in MIDI through mode for output 2. Let's move on and take a look at DAW integrations. Launch Control MK3 has direct integrations with Ableton Live, Logic Pro, Cubase, and FL Studio, and HUI integrations for DAWs that support it, like Reaper, Studio One, and Pro Tools. HUI or HUI is an open protocol that lets you control basic things like levels, panning, sending track names back and forth. In this case, I see 4 letters of the track name, arming tracks, muting tracks, soloing tracks, selecting tracks, and send levels. What the HUI protocol doesn't include is controlling specific device parameters. You'll need a DAW integration for that, or just manually map one of the custom modes. With DAWs that do have a custom integration, you get a lot more. Let's take a look at how this works with Ableton Live, and it's pretty similar with the other ones. You've got 2 main modes for the encoders. You press this button to toggle between them, either parameter control or mixer mode. And then when you're not selecting a mode, these buttons can do one of 4 things: solo, arm, mute, or track select. You can move between tracks using the arrow keys, either one by one, or with shift, go through 8 tracks at a time. And if you go beyond all the project tracks, you'll get to the returns. In mixer mode, the bottom row always controls track levels. So that's the bottom row. Then the top row controls pans by default. But if you hold shift and press the page down key, then this row now gets swapped for sends, in this case for send A, and then press down again, you get to send B, and so on. In DAW control mode, or parameter control mode, the encoders control the first 16 parameters of a device by default. And if it has more than 16 parameters, this little arrow will light up, and you can page down to additional pages of parameters, in which case these 2 lines on the screen will show you what each row controls. So, for example, this row controls resonances, and this row controls filter types. And then to get 2 more visually interesting parameters, this row controls frequencies, and this row controls gains. And then to hop on between devices in the chain, you use Shift and Page to choose the highlighted device. So that's pretty much it for controlling DAWs and Ableton Live specifically. As far as the auto-mapped integration goes, you can also use custom modes to control either hardware gear or DAW parameters that are manually mapped to controls in a custom mode. Launch Control MK3 has 7 user programmable modes and then an 8th fixed mode. You can't change the mappings in mode 8. They're always what it says here on screen for the encoders and for the buttons, including this toggle mode. The thinking behind this is that there would be one mode that would be always the same for every controller, and manufacturers could develop software plugins or hardware that will always respond the same way when you're in this mode. I think it would be nice if they let us edit this as well. Anyway, regardless, like on the XL Mark III, you use the components, web page, or software to edit the custom modes and send them to the device. You can't edit templates on the device itself or use MIDI Learn to map controls, at least not in the current version of the firmware. Hopefully that's added in the future. Let's take a look at what we can customize in here. If you already created a custom mode but forgot to save it, you can always import it from the device itself. So for example, this is the mode that I use to control the Rev 2. I'll show that to you later. You can give modes names, in which case they'll appear as you swap modes. And as you edit the different knobs, you can give them their proper names, their proper parameter names. All of these will appear on screen as well. As far as the encoders go, you can program them, besides their name, to send either controlled changes or NRPNs. Control changes can also be sent as high-resolution parameters. So this will send out an MSB and LSB pair, and you can also change the encoder's LED color. There's no way for you to set knobs to be a relative control, meaning that rather than send absolute positions, they'll let a synth know whenever the user is increasing or decreasing the parameter. There's also no way to set bipolar controls so that you could see visually if you're controlling a bipolar parameter. Hopefully they add those in the future. That's how you can program the encoders. And then the buttons get a few more programming options. Besides sending MIDI CCs, you can also use the buttons to send notes, program changes, NRPNs, and even keystrokes. Buttons can be set to be either momentary or toggle. You can set their on color and off color, and they can send out high-res parameters as well. A final word about components. I'm using a pre-launch version, so you don't see any factory presets here. Presumably Novation will be adding some templates for various devices like they did for the XL. So always be sure to hop in here and check if there's a template for your device. That might save you some manual mapping work. Moving on, we looked at working with software. Let's take a look at working with a hardware synth. One of the ways a MIDI controller can improve the experience of using synths, even ones with a lot of knobs like this one, is that they pretty much always have additional parameters that are only accessible in a menu or only using MIDI CC commands. Rev 2 is an example of a synth that has way more going on than meets the eye, even though it has a lot of knobs. For example, each of its two timbres has a gate sequencer with 4 automation tracks, 16 steps each. Now you can access these parameters using the onboard menu system. So you choose the track that you want to sequence and then go in and edit the values of the steps of each step. But Dave Smith was kind enough to give us MIDI CC, or actually NRPN control of the value of each of these steps using an external MIDI controller. So we don't have to dive into this menu to change the value of each step. So in the case of Rev 2, you can use the launch control as kind of like a DFAM style controller for each of the steps of the automation tracks in its sequencer. And you can even program different modes to access the automation in different tracks. So in this case, you could be doing something totally different, say controlling the cutoff, and then add noise to different steps in the sequence just by increasing these values. To do this, I had to map NRPNs to the different knobs. The manual says which ones you need to program in. One thing, in the manual, the NRPNs are in these long numbers in the thousands. As of the current version of components, you need to convert these to MSB and LSB pairs. There are online calculators that can help you do this. And then specifically here, the 7-bit mapping didn't work, even though the parameters in the sequencer only go up to 127. So in this case, when I control these parameters, only the initial turn of the knob matters. Luckily, sensitivity here works nicely. If I go beyond the 127 mark, then the numbers here skip up real high, but don't have any impact on this. So just a little thing you need to know. I think because of the way these encoders let you fine-tune high-resolution controls, it isn't that much of an issue, but it's something you need to be aware of. And then another interesting way to use this or any other MIDI controller is to pass it through MIDI effects or to have it control MIDI effects. Since Launch Control Mark III doesn't support snapshots, randomization, morphing, or motion recording, which none of its competitors do at this price, so I guess we can't blame it, but some of its higher-priced peers do. So just for fun, I made a little web script that implements those features with the help of Claude. Hopefully this encourages you to try making your own MIDI effects as well. And this will work with any MIDI controller, by the way, or a synth in local off mode to get morphing, snapshots, and so on. The idea is that rather than hook this up directly to a software or hardware synth, I pass its MIDI through my web script on a computer and then send that MIDI out either to one of Launch Control's MIDI ports or any other virtual device or device connected to my computer. So MIDI is now passing through my script and my computer and back out through this port into Rev 2. So I've got the filter control here and noise level here. So all this is nothing to write home about, and we've got these controls on the panel. But things start to get interesting when I use these buttons on the bottom, which are mapped to the buttons on the bottom of the screen. And there's an instruction set here if you want to dive deeper into it. But this lets me, for example, record automation. So say, let's get this held. And then when I hold record and turn a knob, I've now automated this parameter, and I can automate resonance and say noise to bring it in gradually. And if I want to stop the motion recording, all I need to do is wiggle the knob a bit. So that's one cool thing this can do. And then these buttons represent snapshots, and there are 3 modes: save, recall, or morph. Save mode is pretty self-explanatory. I tune a sound to any way I like and then just hit save to save a snapshot. Then I can edit the parameters, say add resonance, add noise, mess with the tuning and maybe the envelope, and then save another snapshot. And then recall mode lets me recall these snapshots. So it's pretty easy to move between presets. Now, this isn't why we save these presets, because Rev 2 already has presets. Morph mode, as you may have guessed, will morph between 2 snapshots, and I can pick any 2 that I want. In morph mode, any one of these knobs controls the morph. So I can go from this sound to this sound. And by the way, the tuning here is quantized because of the Rev 2. This moves pretty smoothly. Then the script has 2 more functions. Randomize will randomize all the knobs totally randomly. So this is before and this is after. This is cool. So if I like this, I can of course go into save mode and save it into, say, snapshot 3. And then I added one more randomization mode, which is a controlled random between 2 snapshots. So randomize just randomizes everything any which way. But let's recall this sound and say that I really like it, but I want to explore maybe a few different settings. Maybe randomize pitch, but not randomize any of the other parameters. Anyway, I'd go into save mode and save it, say into slot 4. And now back to morph mode. I'll select 3 and 4. And now the random range will only randomize between the positions of the knobs in these 2 presets. So we got, I guess, this, and this, and this, and this. Still maintaining the same character because we gave randomization a limited range to work with. You can also save presets if you like. This just downloads all the settings in a file, and then you can load it up again if you like. And then to set this up, I'll just clear everything. You need to teach the script which knobs it's speaking to, and the easiest way is to do that in auto learn mode. Here you just go one by one and wiggle the knobs. Just make sure it shows up as you learn it. You can always turn auto learn off, clear this and do it knob by knob. So either learn a CC and say, let's learn into this slot, or unlearn a CC and learn a different one. If you put it in the wrong place, you can swap things around. And then to map these buttons to the buttons on screen, just set them to consecutive CCs, put that CC into here. I chose the default CC in template 8 or custom mode 8, and set all these buttons to momentary mode, not to toggle mode. When you first load the page up, you also won't see any selected MIDI devices. So this is sort of like the init position. The input to select is launch control MIDI out, or whatever other controller you're using this with. And then the output is either your Synth or DAW device or an IAC device, which can route MIDI within your operating system, or one of launch control's own 2 ports, port 1 or port 2. In this case, I chose port 2. I'll throw this up on my Patreon. Let me know what you think. One thing, by the way, to make sure of when you set this up is not to send MIDI to your synth. Only send MIDI to the computer. So in this case, when you go into edit mode, you'll see that I've got the output set to USB only, not to DIN 1, DIN 2, or all. The MIDI that's going into Rev 2 is actually coming from the script, from the computer, not from the controller. Before we head out to the pros and cons, a quick word about the settings, which you access, like I mentioned, with a long press here. You can set the global MIDI channel here. That gives you flexibility when designing templates if you want to set the channel dynamically after you've finished designing a template. Anyway, those are the global settings, and then each custom mode also gets its on-device settings. You access those with Shift and Edit. This lets you choose whether a mode will merge the incoming MIDI, filter it, select a specific output channel, and you can also choose which port you want to send MIDI out to, either a specific one or all of them. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for the Launch Control Mark III. On the pros side, for what it offers, I don't think there's anything out there that competes with it on value, meaning that at this price, I didn't find anything that comes close with a screen with this level of DAW integration and custom modes. The screen, by the way, is a major pro in my opinion. It's not small, even though it is postage stamp size in the sense that it fits 3 rows of text comfortably in letters that are in the same size of whatever is printed on the panel, maybe even bigger. Also, it's compact, it doesn't take up much room on your desk, and despite the price, it doesn't feel like there's been a compromise in build quality. Then in terms of cons, it doesn't have faders or velocity sensitive pads. There are some alternatives with those though without the screen. So if you get this, knobs and non-velocity sensitive buttons are what you get to work with. Then another form of competitor to consider is MIDI controllers with a keyboard and then potentially buttons, knobs, and faders. Novation itself competes with this with its Launch Key series, and there are plenty of alternatives by other manufacturers with their pros and cons. So get this if you have another keyboard or don't need one. Then another form of alternative to consider, though at more than double the price, is controllers with screens per knob, like Roto Control, Electro One Mini, or E16. Those controllers may also support other advanced features like snapshots, randomization, morphing, and user scripts, but again, at a price. Then in terms of wishlist features, I think it would be nice if they let us overwrite custom mode 8, so we get a total of 8 or maybe more. MIDI Learn would be useful either on device or in components. I think this needs support for relative CCs in the user modes, and keystrokes for the knobs I think would be nice as well, say for zooming into a timeline or scrolling across it. Furthermore, the page buttons and track buttons, as well as this secret Novation button, don't do anything in user modes. Why not let us program them? Finally, I think Novation should manage a user community for custom modes for these controllers and integrate it within components so that users can share their mappings and easily install mappings made by other users. Other companies have done that well. It helps build a community and saves users time. So that's it for Launch Control Mark III, an overall excellent MIDI controller for this price. You'll find the snapshot and morphing script I showed you earlier on my Patreon, along with my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful. Ring the YouTube bell below to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.